Hi, everybody. I'm Gina McCarthy, Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. In 2013, President Obama made fighting climate change a clear priority by announcing a comprehensive climate action plan. It's a plan to help us adapt to today's unavoidable climate impacts and to significantly reduce the carbon pollution that fuels global climate change. At President Obama's direction, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is taking action to cut carbon pollution from our largest domestic source, our power plants. We call it our Clean Power Plan. It's an important step towards a low-carbon future that protects public health and the planet while supporting clean energy innovation and a strong and vibrant economy. We're also working with businesses to develop and implement new emission standards for cars and trucks. We're driving new technologies and advanced biofuels that power them. Through the Montreal Protocol, we're working with many countries as well as the international business community to use refrigerants and other chemicals that protect our ozone layer and our climate. Efforts are also underway to reduce methane emissions both at home in the United States and abroad through the Arctic Council. Fighting climate change demands urgent action from all of us. Through our Clean Power Plan, the United States is firmly committed to doing its part as a leader to fight global climate change. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just 1 minute. If everyone could please take your seats, we'll get started with today's event in just 1 minute. There's a few seats to fill in here in the front row, and there's a row for press in back, and cameras can be set up just behind that back row. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the U.S. Center for this, our marquee event of the 2 weeks. This event is on how the U.S. will reach its 2020 target. So we're so happy to have you here with us today and to have our panel of distinguished presenters. We also would like to welcome our virtual audience. Our online audience is joining us from all over the world, so thank you so much for joining us. And be sure to hashtag AskUSCenter your questions when we turn to the question and answer portion. We have an interesting layout today for this event. We actually have two concurrent and related events. First, we will hear from a panel of government representatives moderated by Andrew Steer on how the U.S. will meet its 2020 target. Then, after that panel is finished, we'll hear from perspectives on the U.S. Climate Action Plan from a group of labor, environment, and business. So 2 related events back to back as one complete package. So I'd like to start out by introducing for opening remarks Mr. Mike Boots, who is the acting chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Mike Boots.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the U.S. Center for this event. It's going to be a great discussion about the progress that the U.S. is making towards our aggressive emission reduction goals. I am going to be brief here today because we've got a lot of panelists to get to and hopefully some questions from all of you. But I do want to take just a minute to set the stage a little bit about the work we have been doing at the federal level to make progress on this threat of climate change that has brought us all to Lima. As you all know, or you wouldn't be here, this is both a global threat and a very, very urgent threat. And the president knows that as well and has made it a key priority since the day he took office. In fact, 5 years ago in Copenhagen, the United States first announced its emission reduction goals to reduce in the range of 17% below the 2005 levels. And at that time, we were on a trajectory to have our emissions rise by about 5%. But because of a whole bunch of work, both at the federal level, state and local level, and by the private sector, as we'll hear about today, we are well on our way to meeting those goals. That was the president's first year in office, and we have made a lot of progress, as I said. During the first 4 years, the United States took some really historic action. First, when it came to putting in place major new fuel efficiency standards for cars and trucks. We more than doubled electricity generation from wind and solar. And we put in place a whole series of appliance standards from an energy efficiency perspective that are both saving a whole lot of energy, but also reducing electricity bills for consumers. In the second term, the president has really built on that track record. And last year, he launched a comprehensive climate action plan, which you have probably heard a lot about, and we will talk more about today, that had 3 main objectives. The first was to tackle carbon pollution that drives climate change. The second is to really make sure we were preparing our communities for the impacts of climate change that are simply too late to avoid. And the third is what we're doing here in Lima and we'll do in Paris, which is to make sure that we are leading and lending as much of our voice as we can on the international stage. A big part of what sits in that climate action plan and kind of at the heart of it is the Clean Power Plan, which you just heard Administrator Gina McCarthy talk about on that video. Right now, about 40% of our annual carbon emissions come from the power sector. And so the Climate Action Plan called for new national limits for carbon pollution from that sector, the first time that we have tackled that in the United States. And in June, the EPA put out a proposal to do just that, to try to reduce by 30% the carbon pollution coming from these plants by the year 2030. Janet McCabe is going to talk a little bit more about that when she joins us by video from back in the States, and talk a little bit about how those targets are going to really help us, how that plan is going to help us meet our targets, and also really have a huge benefit when it comes to public health. So we've made some great strides in transitioning to a clean energy economy. Especially, we are going to continue to do our work to make sure that that is contributing on the international stage. And again, the president felt very strongly, continues to feel very strongly, that we must make great progress both in our 2020 goal and in the 2025 goal that he just recently announced, if we're going to be able to be a credible voice on the international stage. And so today's panel will do a lot to get us talking through all of those issues and give us a good sense of where we sit in relation to those targets. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Andrew Steer, who's the president of the World Resources Institute. He is going to have the fun job of moderating this today. And I'm really grateful to have him here, given how busy Andrew is flying all over the world to talk about climate. But let me quickly introduce the folks who are going to be here to talk about the administration's work. First, as I said, joining us remotely is Janet McCabe. Janet is the acting assistant administrator Chair for the Office of Air and Radiation at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She has been, I think it's even unfair to say she's been deeply involved in the Clean Power Plan. She has been the Clean Power Plan at EPA, really engaging with state and local governments and utilities for the last year to build that, and we will hear a lot more about that in just a few minutes. Rick Duke is the Deputy Director for Energy and Climate Change at the White House and has again been a key voice in the development of not only the Clean Power Plan, but really all U.S. climate policy and are driving our emissions targets domestically and internationally. And Dr. Jonathan Pershing is the Principal Deputy Director of the Office of Energy Policy and Systems Analysis, and he also serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Climate Change Policy and Technology in the Office of International Affairs at the Department of Energy. That's a lot of title. In those roles, he really supports DOE's domestic policy agenda and then their international work as well. And so I'm going to turn this over to Andrew, but before I do, I just want to thank everybody in this room who has been very supportive of the work we've been doing at the federal level and doing that back in the communities and the businesses that you are working in as well. The President talks often about the fact that we have a moral obligation to make sure that we don't leave behind a planet that's polluted and damaged. And we are doing our part on that obligation, but I know that you all as well are doing your part as too. So thank you for that effort, and we ask you to continue it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Thanks very much, Mike. It's a delight to be here. This is an important subject, exciting days for U.S. climate policy and for global climate policy, and how great it is to see the United States sort of really out there playing a hugely constructive role. So this session is primarily about the sort of how do we get to 2020, but I bet some of you want to ask questions also about beyond 2020, so don't be shy about that either. This morning in the China Pavilion, I had the privilege to be on a panel with Al Gore and Minister Shea, and certainly the deal that the United States did with China, a real game changer. But primarily today we're going to speak about some of the technical aspects, so it's going to be a bit wonky, I hope, in this lineup. And then Janet, on the video, you probably have more technical brain power about things that most people will never know about. But people in this room, I bet, are really interested in what you're about to hear, and feel free to ask questions. Rick, you're going to kick off on June the 25th last year, 2013, I guess. We had the announcement from the President on the Climate Action Plan. Since then, we've seen a lot of really interesting things rolled out. How goes the battle?
Thank you, Andrew. And I'm going to start with just a brief presentation, and then hopefully that'll set us up well for the discussion. I'll be quick and echo some of the things that Mike Boots just went through, but next slide, please. So I wanted to just begin with an overview of where we are. As Mike indicated, thank you. As Mike indicated, when the President made his commitment for 2020 back in 2009, to cut emissions 17% by that year, in the range of 17%. It's important to recall that at that time, our emissions were actually projected to steadily increase. And so really the commitment made at that time involved a 22% roughly reduction from our trajectory. So a major bold goal, and the good news is that we're on track to meet it. And I'll also talk a little bit at the end about the 2025 joint announcement of our goal with China. Next slide, please. So again, as Mike already covered, this is the elements of the June 2013 Climate Action Plan. Cut our emissions domestically, prepare for climate impacts, and then lead internationally. Just to add a little bit on the leading internationally part, there are many ways in which that's happening. Of course, we're deeply engaged in the discussions here in Lima and all the way through Paris, and very committed to this process. In addition to that, the President has been directly engaged on complementary efforts like working towards an amendment to the Montreal Protocol to address industrial hydrofluorocarbon pollutants. Tremendous success there, working jointly at a leader level with China. Also great discussions with India and other countries, and much more to come in movement towards amending the Montreal Protocol so that we can have a global approach to this particular class of global greenhouse gases, which is so important, and by some estimates could be responsible for up to 0.5 degree of warming by the end of the century by some estimates. So would really like to see progress collectively on that journey, and we're doing what we can to help. In addition, it's worth noting that on the international part of this climate action plan, beyond the UNFCCC work here this week and last and through Paris, we have also taken steps like eliminating public subsidy for conventional coal-fired power plant export without carbon capture and storage. So working with many countries to try to create momentum in that direction globally, and we've seen some really fantastic leadership on that front from European and Nordic countries as well. Next slide, please. Here's just a picture of what the numbers look like. And in particular, if you look at that red line from our climate action report of 2010 vintage, what you see there is, again, this notion that when the president made his commitment in the 2009-2010 time frame, our emissions were projected to just keep increasing as our population grew, as our economy grew. And so we needed to get down to that dashed line, the 17% below, again, a 22% swing in order to make that happen in about a decade. So a very substantial pace of progress entailed. The green line is a reasonable proxy for where we were sort of at the end of the first term, the first 4 years of the president's efforts. And that included some really important measures that helped to downclick from the red to the green, including fuel economy standards to double miles per gallon of new vehicles by 2025, doubling renewables, as Boots indicated, from solar and wind, and a whole suite of things like building codes and appliance standards and other efforts, all of which are going to yield growing reductions over time. And then the gray zone is what the Climate Action Plan is delivering. And the reason that it's a wedge, just to explain that, is that we wanted to appropriately reflect the uncertainty in our projections about our land sector sinks. And as I was pleased to report in the multilateral assessment segment on Monday here, after a year plus of intensive effort on both measurement, enhancement, and mitigation bolstering of our carbon sinks in the land sector, we're tracking much closer to the optimistic side of that land sector wedge. So that, plus additional measures to cut emissions, I wanted to give a quick sense of the comprehensive nature of all the efforts that we have in place. And really we're covering all sectors, all gases, and under existing legislative requirements and authorities, moving ahead to make smart reductions that are in many cases saving consumers money, helping the economy, creating growth opportunities for businesses, and cutting carbon pollution in the process, and as Boots importantly noted, improving public health in most cases. So we're covering everything from the Clean Power Plan, addressing the power sector, to a cross-agency methane strategy, covers landfills and oil and gas and a whole range of other opportunities. Lots happening in the transportation sector, 3 billion metric ton appliance and equipment standards effort. Lots happening, and it's putting us where we need to be. Next, and I think last slide. Here I just wanted to briefly comment on what our 2025 goal looks like and put that in context historically. What you see here is basically our historic emissions through to the present roughly, and the new 2025 target reflected here as a range from 26 to 28% reductions by that year. And a couple things that are worth noting here. One, we're picking up the pace. So we were already moving at a considerable clip in order to reach our 2020 goal. And now, recognizing the need for ambition, the need for speed, we are in fact going to be moving faster after 2020 to hit this 26 to 28% goal. And then most importantly, that puts us in the range of reductions that are deep decarbonization reductions on the order of 80% by mid-century. So that's it for my upfront presentation, I think. Last slide, in case there is one. Just a summary. Thanks.
Well done, Rick. Thanks very much. That was very precise and brief. That was great. We have Janet McCabe on the video, I hope. We see a door. Here she comes. That's terrific. Hi, Janet. We look forward to your comments. I think you, more than anybody else, understand the new power plant rules and how they're going. So tell us about it.
All right, well, thank you, Andrew, and hello, everybody. It's really wonderful to be able to participate without having to take a long plane ride, so I appreciate the technology. Rick has done a nice job of laying out a summary of the President's Climate Action Plan, and as you saw, there are a number of initiatives in there, a number of which are within the responsibility of the Environmental Protection Agency, but at the risk of being parochial and hurting anybody's feelings, I will say that I think the Clean Power Plan is the crown jewel of many of those activities. And what I'd like to do today in just a few minutes is kind of run you through the major elements of the Clean Power Plan and then look forward to your questions on it. We can't see the slides, so I'm going to ask whoever's running them to go to slide 2, and I'm going to take it on faith that you're looking at the same thing that I'm looking at. As we've noted, and you know because you wouldn't be in Lima if you didn't, climate change is with us now, it's firmly in the present, and we need to be doing some things to address it. In December, to take you back a little bit in history, in December of 2009, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency made a determination that based on vast amounts of science, that greenhouse gases threaten public health and welfare. As we discussed, power plants are the single largest concentrated source of carbon dioxide emissions in the United States, and they account for about a third of all domestic greenhouse gas emissions. And while we have in place and have built up over a number of years limits for a variety of air pollutants emitted by fossil fuel-fired power plants such as arsenic, mercury, sulfur dioxide, and those issues, there are no limits in place for carbon from this source category. In the President's Climate Action Plan, he did call for EPA to set such standards for new and existing fossil-fired power plants. And so that is what we have been doing. And we're using for this purpose the section of the Clean Air Act, which we believe is the appropriate one and well suited to this, which is Section 111. And I'll explain about that a little bit more as I go on, but there's some key issues that I just wanted to tee up sort of thematically about the program. So we at EPA rely heavily on stakeholder engagement when we develop our regulations, and this has been an exception only in the extent to which we have taken that commitment, and I'll give you some information on that in a minute. The program is a useful one, we think, because it's a very flexible one, which I'll explain a little bit more. We do need to consider a variety of factors as we evaluate the appropriate level and expectation to set in this rule, including the extent of emissions reductions that can be achieved, the cost of those emission reductions, other impacts that anybody would want us to be considering as we move forward developing a program like this. And importantly, also making sure that we are preserving and enhancing, in fact, the reliability and the affordability of energy in this country, which is so important to the economy. So let's move to slide 3, and I'll talk a little bit more about Section 111. It has been in the Clean Air Act for many, many years, and it is our main workhorse section for setting pollution standards for different sectors of industrial activity. These are technology-based regulations relying on something called the best system of emission reduction, which EPA is to determine. And in Section 111B, EPA is to set standards for new activities in these different categories in various rulemakings to ensure that as new activities, as new plants get built in this country, they are built to a very high expectation of pollution reduction and efficiency. There's a second part of Section 111 called Section 111D, which deals with existing sources, and both of those sections are important for the Clean Power Plan and the work that we are doing here. This, as I noted, this is section of the Clean Air Act has been around for a long time. We have more than 70 rules for different source categories that we've established. The system of, or the determination of best system of emission reduction is something that we're all very comfortable understanding how we do it. We are proceeding with both a 111B rule for new and modified sources, and we are also proceeding with a proposal for existing sources, and that's the 111D plant or proposal. Let me say one more thing before we move to slide 4, which is under the Clean Air Act, there has always been a significant partnership between the federal government and the state government when it comes to air pollution regulation. And very simply put, for the most part, this is not universally true, but in many parts of the Clean Air Act, the expectation is that EPA will set standards for new plants, for new activity going forward, and it will be up to the states to take responsibility when reductions need to come from the existing facilities that exist in this country. And the notion there is that states are generally in a better position to know the best ways to achieve whatever the needed pollution reduction outcome is. So I would just want you to keep that in mind as we talk about these different parts of the Clean Power Plan, and in particular the 111D rule. So let's move to slide 4, if you would please. We proposed our Clean Power Plan for existing sources on June 2nd of 2014. And as I will explain, in making our best system of emission reduction determination, we were charged with looking across this particular sector, fossil fuel fired generators, to see what techniques and approaches and controls the sector is currently using that result in reductions of carbon emissions. And so that's what we've done. So that explains that first sub-bullet, which says that that this proposal builds on actions that the states, cities, and utilities and other businesses are already doing, and that has proven to be, I think, a very successful platform for this program. As highlights, before I go into a little bit more of the specifics, the program would reduce carbon from existing power plants by the year 2030 by about 30% compared to levels in 2005. And because we have established proposed interim targets for the state plans, we expect a significant chunk of that reduction to happen by 2020 on the order of 26 to 27%. Mike, I think, mentioned at the beginning the incredible additional public health benefits that come along with this program. When you reduce carbon dioxide from these sorts of plants, you are going to also get reductions in NOx, in sulfur dioxide, in particulates, and so that will bring hundreds of thousands of fewer tons of those pollutants to communities across the United States with a very immediate and positive health benefit to the families that live in those communities, which is a very, very positive aspect of it. And you'll see there the extent of the public health benefits that we expect to achieve through this rule. As the agency responsible for addressing air pollution in all its forms, this is a very positive aspect of this program. Let's move to slide 5 and talk a little bit about how the rule works. Those top bullets, again, are some of the high-level messages about the rule. It relies on this federal-state partnership. It builds on progress that's already being made. We believe will enhance our ability to make sure we have a reliable and affordable energy system going forward. EPA is not an energy policy agency, so we're not trying to set energy policy here, and we think that the energy system is well suited to absorb the expectations of the Clean Power Plan and move forward in an appropriate way. Another key factor that is built into this proposal is the factor of time. We recognize that in order to make these kinds of changes on a system this large and interconnected, the companies and the states need time to plan those activities and think ahead and make sure that newer construction that has happened recently is not stranded, which would cause problems for the system. So those are some main themes. The proposal has two main parts, and they will sound familiar to you based on the setup that I gave you about the relative state and federal responsibilities. The first part is EPA's responsibility to set the expectation of the environmental result to be achieved here. And so that is the goal that we're setting in the plan. And it's a number. It is an expected rate of carbon, and I'll talk about that in a minute when we get to the next slide. And then the other big part of the proposal lays out our expectations and our guidance for states on how to take that target, and each state has an individual target, as I'll explain, and turn that into a plan of action that will lead them forward to achieve these reductions by the deadlines in the rule. Going to slide 6, I'll talk about the goals here for a moment. I mentioned the best system of emission reduction. That's our touchstone. That's our legal, the place we find our authority to establish these targets. And you see there the 4 considerations that we are to take into account. And what we did, as I said, we looked across the universe of activity going on and identified the things that we saw that were happening in this very interconnected system of providing electricity that were already resulting in reduced carbon. And there are many, many activities that have that result. We identified 4 key major ones that we identify and have nicknamed building blocks in our proposal, and those are listed at the bottom. And I think they're worth repeating. The 4 key things that we saw that were being implemented were make those plants as efficient as possible. We saw that more energy was being produced using lower carbon intensive fuels, that is natural gas, than higher carbon intensive fuels, that is coal. So that's our second building block. A significant move towards renewable energy, very, very low or zero carbon emitting energy. So that's building block 3. And then building block 4 is not needing to produce the electricity in the first place, or energy efficiency, and much activity on that. But I want to emphasize, and I will illustrate to you in a minute, the other options that states have. What we did was we looked at each state's mix of plants, of fuels, their renewable energy goals and policies. We looked at this regionally, we looked at this nationally in a variety of different ways. And based on that each state's position in 2012, we derived a state-specific target using these 4 building blocks. And so, as you can imagine, since they all started in a different place, their targets in terms of the percent reduction required to get to a less carbon-intensive pollution to power ratio is going to differ from state to state. If we go to slide 7, you can see on this chart, on the leftmost column is these 4 building blocks that I've identified. In the middle column are the kinds of strategies that we looked at that formed the basis for identifying those 4 building blocks as our key elements. And then on the rightmost column, you can see the other types of things, and this is not, I would emphasize, a comprehensive list, but there are many other things that states can do to reduce the carbon intensity of the power that they produce in their country. Let's go to slide 8, and I'm trying to be mindful of the time here so that I don't hog too much of the time. But I did want to spend a minute on the second big element of the proposal, which is the state plans. So this is a process that states are familiar with because they use a state planning process to build their plans to meet various other air quality goals. And so this will be very similar to those. One of the key features in it is that states, as I've emphasized here, have absolute flexibility to use whatever types of activities they want to and choose to and are consistent with their own state policies and goals as long as they get to that ultimate target. And so the states will go about a process of working with their stakeholders within their states to map out a course of action, working especially with their utilities, to get to the targets that we have laid out, both in terms of the interim targets and the final targets. We have made clear in the proposal that states can act on their own, or they can join with other states to put together a joint plan or a multi-state plan. We've had a lot of interest in how those might work. We have some states in the United States that are already doing that. And we want to make sure that those kinds of arrangements, to the extent that they fit with states' desires and legal authorities, that we make every flexibility available that we can on that. The state planning process, I want to emphasize, is essential to make this program work, because states will be able to tailor plans to fit their needs. States across the country are very different. We also think that a localized state-based process will really allow states and industries and all the other stakeholders to maximize the incredibly positive benefits of the kinds of activities that we see happening that get to lower carbon. And I'm talking particularly as an example about energy efficiency. There's a tremendous amount of a very positive investment going on around the country in energy efficiency. That lowers cost of energy to consumers. It provides local jobs in those communities. It is very positive and long-lasting investment in those communities, and we think that the states that have gone forward aggressively with those sorts of programs see the benefits of those kinds of programs and want to do more. And so we, in fact, believe that the way this plan is designed will encourage people, once they really start ramping up these programs, to realize how truly beneficial they are, and may feel that they can move faster than the targets that we have set and the deadlines that we have set. So let's go to slide 9, and I think this is my last slide, just to mention the outreach effort that we have had. This is clearly a highly significant and substantial and important rule. We have treated it that way. Before we even put a proposal out, we held 9 or more months worth of outreach with stakeholders of all sorts, hundreds of meetings literally, and we had a series of public hearings when our rule went out. We just closed the public comment period on the rule the 1st of December, and we have, last count, 2.2 million comments that I'm aware of. This shows that there is significant interest in this program across the country, and we really appreciate it. The proposal would not be as well developed as it was without that engagement and that input, and all along the way we have been getting that kind of input. One of the advantages from my perspective is that we are on a very fast and urgent time frame to get this proposal finalized, and the more input we can have along the way, the better an outcome we can have on the timeline that the President has set for us. So I will stop there, I think, Andrew, and turn it back to you, and I'm going to hang out here at the podium so that when we get to questions, I'll be visible. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Janet, very much indeed. That was remarkable. I thought I understood it all before that, but now I really understand it. And I'm dying to ask you how many people it takes to read 2.2 million comments, but I will resist that temptation, because I simply can't imagine how you'd do that, but you have done it. So I think there'll be quite a few questions for Janet and for the first 3 of you that have spoken, but I want to turn to Jonathan first. I mean, you're at the Department for Energy, obviously. How does your work fit into this whole thing?
Thanks very much, Andrew. It's kind of hard to follow Janet, who ends up with this huge program and millions of comments. What I'll come to now is a little bit of a different perspective on the energy sector. For people who are not really conversant with U.S. emissions, about 85% of U.S. emissions come from energy and energy-related activities. So clearly it's at the heart of the efforts that we're trying to mount to address the climate change problem. And while the single big initiative that Janet framed is the large piece, there's a lot of additional work going on. I just want to highlight a few of the sub-elements that are in those activities. The first one is that we're also addressing a series of standards. The idea behind this is that there are a number of things that consumers use on a regular basis, and many of them are not really aware of what kind of electricity is consumed and don't pay much attention. It's not the first thing you do when you plug in your refrigerator to know if it's going to be more or less efficient. But a small gain in electric efficiency can make a huge difference at a national level, particularly in the context of a country the size of the United States. So we're doing these for about 50 collective activities. The intent over all of them is to yield about 3 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. It's an enormous number. In this past year alone, we've released standards on 9 new appliances, things that had not previous to this been framed in the context of greenhouse gas emissions, and they're on everyday things that people use all the time. We've done fans, we've done motors, we've done microwave ovens, things that are just part of your daily life that if you can take these small incremental reductions, they really, really add up. A second thing that we've really been working on. One of the things that's useful to think about in the context of the US energy system is the fuel mix, the balance of where we are. In the big picture, you've got the program that Janet's really talked through in the dynamics of how you reduce power plant emissions and setting some standards for people. What do you do? How do you move that forward? Let me tell you what the numbers are, though, for the United States, because they frame the context of the strategy that we're adopting. 39% of US electricity comes from coal, 27% comes from gas, nuclear power, 19%, hydro, 7%, and renewables, the rest of the renewables, only 6%. So if you think about what you have to do to manage that, you need what we call the all-of-the-above strategy. You have to think about every part of the system, every subsector, and do something in every domain. And the Department of Energy is in each one of those things taking huge action. What kinds of programs? Well, coals are a huge problem for us. One of the ways we'll address it is having standards for emissions, but another way we're addressing it is looking at carbon capture and storage. We can use coal if we can get rid of the emissions that are associated with coal, but we don't know how to do it yet in a sufficiently affordable way to make it a choice that we're all going to adopt. The Energy Department is working on reducing those prices. We put $6 billion into this initiative over the last couple of years, and we intend to move this forward. This has got value not just at home for us, but around the world where coal continues to be a major source. There are solutions that will get you more than 90% of the CO2 out and make it competitive against almost any other technology. We're doing work in addition on the renewable side. Very clearly, and Rick has mentioned and Boots has mentioned, the President has announced an objective to double our supply from renewable energy. It's a hard number. What's DOE doing in this particular mix? We've got a series of programs being funded on reducing the cost. One of them is something called the Sunshot Initiative. This is an exercise which is seeking to reduce the price of solar power by 75% between 2010 and 2020. What does that mean? It means you go from $6 a watt down to $1.50 a watt for a rooftop residential solar facility. If we can do that, solar is now competitive in a global marketplace, and we are making huge strides in this direction, largely on the back not just of US research, but global research and efforts to penetrate, but we are making a major contribution on our side. The Department of Energy, for example, has got $34 billion invested in a variety of programs through the Loan Program Office to address questions like this and others. Here's a nice example for those of you who have access to it. We put in the major loan from the Department of Energy to fund the startup of Tesla automobile. So here's a car that gets you 200 miles per gallon on an electric vehicle charge that runs with no emissions from the car itself. It's a brand new technology, it's a new paradigm, and you know what? Tesla paid the loan back 9 years early. Why did they do that? They needed the upfront capital, but now they're a commercially profitable company. And that also is part of our vision for what we at the department can do. We're not in this to subsidize it, we're in it to reduce the upfront costs, to catalyze private investment, to frame an opportunity going forward for all countries, but including ourselves, about what comes next. And then finally, Andrew, you've asked the question a bit about how this plays out in the longer term. The Department of Energy is nothing if not a science and tech agency. We are one of the biggest portfolios in the world on basic research in the agenda of science and technology. We launched at the beginning of the president's term a program for advanced energy projects and research, ARPA-E we call it. It's been doing an enormous amount of work on the new things that we're all going to need, not just now, but in the post-2020, the post-2025 world, to design a vision and an alternative for the future. We've worked on things like smart grid options. How do you communicate back and forth between the consumer and the producer so you can reduce costs and efficiency can improve? We've worked on new design for materials so you can lightweight your vehicle. We've worked on structures for polymers that end up making efficiency for storage of electricity. These are the kinds of things that we can do going forward that will be absolutely essential and will drive both our medium and long-term options as we do it. These have all been on the CO2 side. We're also working on the non-CO2 side. Methane, about 9% of US greenhouse gas emissions. A non-trivial share comes from the energy sector, not least in the new oil and gas dimensions of US development in the energy sector. We've got some leakages. That's a problem that we have to worry about. Where's DOE in this endeavor? We've put in $30 million for new technology on monitoring leaks. If we can know where it's coming from, you can start to manage it. And when you manage it, you can capture it. And when you capture it, you can benefit from the price for which you can sell it. But we have to do that first piece. We have to figure out where it's coming from and control that. And those are programs we too, working with EPA, with the Department of Interior, are seeking to manage. And then last but not least, Rick mentioned in his framing that this is not just a domestic program, it's an international one, and it's not just a mitigation program, it's a resilience program. Let me just give you one example on the resilience side that I think really comes home for us. We had a major storm last year. Many of you may have heard about it. It was in the press. Called it Hurricane Sandy. It wasn't actually a hurricane, but it was awfully close to one. And it ended up devastating a great number of the cities and the eastern seaboard. One of the things that it did was that it took out the power supply, the electricity supply, for much of the New York metropolitan region, a hub for our financial activity, a major center for industrial and commercial affairs. One of the things that happened was it also took out the commuter rail system, running on electricity that provided the workforce that went into the New York City region every day to work and then came home. The power was out, the rail didn't run. We put in a loan program to provide funds for the region to develop a renewable energy microgrid to keep the rails running. So here's a program that's fundamentally of a different kind. It merges the resilience discussion with the mitigation discussion. It tries to frame things in the way, looking at the new obligations that we have because of greenhouse gas constraints and the greenhouse gas impacts of changing climate, and find solutions that marry the two. That's what we'd like to think is the hallmark of what we're trying to do at DOE and what we're trying to do in the US program. Thanks, Andrew.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And a great story there about Tesla. I mean, if you look at Tesla's market capitalization now, it's almost half that of General Motors. And in the New Climate Economy, which is the report that came out a couple of months ago, the report of the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate, we looked at Tesla. And the interesting thing about it is actually it was started not by automobile people, but by software, which is an entirely new way of thinking about technological change. And the fact that the United States government actually jump-started that is really remarkable. I would love to ask you some questions, but I think people in the audience deserve the right to ask some. So let's maybe take 3 or 4, and then we'll pass them on. Let's start at the back.
Hi, my name is Lee Fong. I'm from The Nation magazine. I wanted to ask 2 questions. The first, for the United States Climate Action Plan and what's being discussed here in Lima, are the projections, do they take into account the potential for increased methane emissions given the push by industry for new LNG, liquefied natural gas exports? The industry has gained support for those new export terminals from both the administration and Congress. So I'd like your perspective on that. And second, I have a quick question on ethics. President Obama, as a candidate, promised to close the revolving door between lobbyists and industry and government. In the last year, the top climate advisor to the president, Heather Zeichel, left the administration and joined a fossil fuel company, Cheniere Energy, which is involved in LNG exports. Is there any sort of firewall between Heather's new role and the administration? Does she still contact folks at the White House?
Question here.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Thank you. I'm Tian from China. And two questions here. One is for Rick. Is that we welcome the new target from United States then to reduce 26 to 28% by 2025. And are we now on the track to meet this target, or any additional measures are still needed to meet that? Because we know that we already on the track to meet the 17% target, but maybe some more are needed to meet this new target. And the other one is for Janet. As you mentioned that there's a plan for states to propose their plans in 2017 or 2018 about their own plans, but do we have a mechanism to evaluate if their plans are adequate for our 2030 target? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll take one more. Let's see, this lady here.
Thank you. Masha Khovanskaya from Regional Environmental Center for Central and Eastern Europe. Actually, it's very good to hear that mitigation and resilience are married together in the whole state program. So it's I'm very happy to hear it. So my question is for Janet. Again, so about this flexibility potential for the states. So is it possible whether it will be some kind of offset mechanism that the plants can get offsets, like mechanism like CDM, and get the offsets from abroad or from other states?
Okay, good questions. One more? Yes, we'll take one more.
Thanks. Congratulations for the presentation. Alfonso de la Torre of the Climatic Change Council of the Federal Government of Mexico. And my question is, in the climatic change system of the United States, do you have a place for social participation, and what is the place in the law, in the federal law?
Great, thank you very much indeed. Public participation. Boots. Rick for the first one. Okay, on the methane emission.
Thank you for the excellent questions. And on the methane question, let me start with that. The first thing to say is that when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, we, of course, cover all gases from all sectors in our inventory that the Environmental Protection Agency maintains. So in all of our current and projected emissions estimates, we take a comprehensive approach that includes the kinds of life cycle questions that you're alluding to, and that Jonathan also mentioned. The DOE is working to minimize methane emissions in the oil and gas sector, for example, are part and parcel of the EPA's annual greenhouse gas inventory. So when we look at things like increased natural gas consumption that is displacing coal in the power sector and that will be playing an important role, as Janet McCabe indicated in the Clean Power Plan, all of that life cycle considerations, all those life cycle considerations are built into our numbers, and we'll continue to both monitor those trends and manage them down through the kinds of mechanisms that Jonathan alluded to. With respect to the second question, I'll just take that now around ethics in the administration. Of course, the President has made very clear that ethics is central to our mission, and we all take that very seriously, and it is something which is central to ensuring that we're able to maintain the public trust and do our work. And I think that we have had a very exemplary record in that 6 years into the administration. And then let me just, I think I've got one more on my list here before maybe I hand the mic. I think Janet comes next. The 26 to 28% question. I introduced the announcement made jointly between President Obama and President Xi of China, where our commitment was to reduce emissions in the 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2025. And the question is, to what extent are we on track towards that? And I think the emphasis that we have this week, including in the hour-and-a-half discussion that we did in the multilateral assessment on Monday here, an excellent discussion, I should say, and in this week's activities, is really still on the 2020 goal and delivering against that. We feel very confident, though, that the work that we're doing that is putting us on track to our 2020 goal is also setting the foundation for success against the new 2025 goal. That goal was developed through careful analysis of measures that are both required and possible under existing law across all sectors and gases, and many of which really gain momentum over time. So as we look at things like fuel economy standards for light-duty vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles and the appliance standards that Jonathan referenced, these kinds of measures gain momentum as they become more stringent over time and as the stock of vehicles or microwaves or whatever it may be turns over. And so we factored that all into our analysis, and we've set our 2025 target based on a careful, comprehensive, integrated cross-agency set of analyses. So we are quite confident that we can deliver on that as well as our 2020 goal. And I think then over to the administrator. Right?
I think we go to the EPA. Janet, if you could, I think there are a couple of questions for you. If you could be fairly brief, because actually time is really rolling on.
Absolutely. Excellent and intelligent questions. The first one had to do with some kind of feedback mechanism to make sure that the state plans, as they're developed in 2016, 17, or 18, are actually going to get the states to where they need to be. We have a very tried and true process under the Clean Air Act where state plans go through a public review at the state level. They also go through an approval process with EPA. So we will evaluate them and make a judgment about whether they are likely to be successful, and then approve them if they are, and work with the states if we think that they are not. We intend to be working with the states, and we already are, all the way up to the point where they're submitting their plans, so there should be no surprises along the way, and we think that every state has the opportunity to be very successful here. The second question had to do with whether the plans would allow states to use various sorts of offset mechanisms that would go towards reductions that could happen outside the fossil fuel sector, such as in the transportation side. And the way Section 111 works, it is very much focused on the industrial sector that is being regulated, and we do not have the legal authority to allow offsets from very disconnected or remote activities to be factored into our approach under that rule.
Great, thank you very much, Janet. Jonathan.
Just very briefly to answer the last question on public participation, pretty much every single part of the U.S. system requires it. We have it in a number of different places. At the front end, as we're designing policies, every single one of these big policies that we've spoken about has been the result both of internal work and of consultations around the country. Janet spoke about hers process that EPA ran. They went to pretty much every region, and they had many, many meetings, and thousands of people went to the meetings. And then above and beyond that, we now have millions of comments that have come back in. The Department of Energy releases draft recommendations on its efficiency standards, and those are subject to public comment. We're doing this quadrennial energy review, an effort to evaluate the entire energy infrastructure of transmission and distribution. We've done 14 sessions around the country where we've brought experts in and had public comment period. These same things happen at every level of the process. Public participation is a key and integral part of all of our work.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. And just one extra word to our friend from China asking about the 26, 28%. If you're interested and you want sort of an independent assessment of that, just yesterday on the World Resources Institute website, we were finding quite a lot of people were asking the question, so is this, can it be done? What extra would be required to be done? Is it ambitious? And so on. So we've put like a 4-page note there that lays it out, and our assessment is actually very similar to what has been said here, that it is ambitious, it is doable. We also spend quite a bit of analytical time looking at the question, can this be done under what we call existing authority without going to Congress? Because obviously that's a very real issue there. More questions? Yes, sir.
And this will have to be our final round.
Hi, Ben Jervey from Grist and National Geographic. Just quickly back to the methane question, because the latest science seems to be pretty dramatic about the leakage rates. Just to be totally clear, is that 17% below 2005 levels by 2020, that factors in methane as a greenhouse gas equivalent? And if so, what is the science you're using to determine the leakage rate for that?
Thank you very much. And at the back?
Thank you for taking my question. Thank you all for your presentation. I quickly like to point out that the presentation by Mr. Duke is, I believe, a shortened version of the one used during the multilateral assessment, which I found very interesting. My question, I guess, is about internationally determined contributions, upcoming INDCs. So I understand that the 2025 targets will be the basis of the US INDC. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on what on the several points of the INDC, who is involved with the designing of the INDC, were you in the process of doing that, and what the INDC may contain beyond the mitigation target for 2025. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we'll take one more if there is one. Here.
Thank you. My name is Max Dilley. I recognize that it is probably a very small part of the solution, but I've noticed as a bicyclist that many cities in the U.S. are promoting bicycle riding, putting in bike lanes, bike sharing, and so on. I just wondered how important is that from the point of view of emissions, and what, if anything, is the federal government doing to support that? Thank you.
Good question. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So the first question was methane again.
Thank you for another round of good questions. Again, with respect to methane, the short answer to the first part of that question is yes, it's included, it's factored in. We take an economy-wide approach and we track the methane from landfills, from oil and gas, from agriculture, and build that into the annual inventory that the Environmental Protection Agency maintains and that we report formally in the UNFCCC context and otherwise. I'd also mention with respect to the science of methane, we work to maintain our global warming potentials and other technical aspects of what we do in that inventory based on the ongoing efforts of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and we'll continue to do that and be as transparent as we can be about all of that over time. And I guess with respect to the science more broadly, it's worth noting that in the interagency methane strategy from earlier this year that I mentioned we had released, and that estimated potential reductions up to 90 million metric tons per year from various methane measures. Within that same strategy, there's considerable discussion of the scientific work underway across agencies, like the kinds of things that Jonathan has laid out that the Department of Energy is doing to enhance our ability to measure and track and manage down methane emissions throughout the economy. With respect to the INDC, the nationally determined contribution and the formal submission of the 26 to 28% target that we jointly announced with China, what I would say is that we have, of course, we will certainly meet the deadline to submit the formal submission. Of course, the headline will be the same as what was in the joint announcement, but we will go to every length to make sure that we are providing all the transparency that is being negotiated this week, and which we are highly supportive of. So as much as possible, we are seeking maximum information in these NDC submissions, and we will, of course, fully comply with what is agreed upon by all parties this week, and we look forward to completing those negotiations. And on cycling, I'm an avid cycler. I cycle to work every day. It's a 5-minute, 1-mile commute. I wish it was longer. We certainly appreciate what cities are doing on bike lanes. I appreciate it personally, and it's certainly a part of the kind of tailwinds on all of our climate action plan efforts that cities and other jurisdictions are moving more towards cycling as part of the transportation infrastructure. Others are probably avid cyclists too.
Let me just say one other thing on that. There is your question about what the federal government is doing to help support some of those initiatives. There's a partnership for sustainable communities that is housed at both the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is meant to both align federal priorities and dollars and incentives, and to maximize what state and local governments are doing on that front. So over the last 6 years, those three departments kind of thinking across their different lanes to really try to encourage more of that activity at the local and state level.
Great. And how far do you cycle to work each day?
Less than Rick.
Less than Rick. Okay. Well, Rick, I actually cycle 11 miles, so you come out to my house and we'll do it together. Look, I think that we have to stop now, unfortunately. This was not boring at all. I thought this was amazing, actually. I mean, really, really interesting. Janet, thank you. Back there, this is crystal clear. Next year, none of us need to come. We can just do it by TV. Thank you all. I'm sure the very distinguished panel will be happy to answer any questions afterwards. Let's give them a round of applause. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to Andrew, our moderator. Thank you to our panelists. We're going to do a quick switch, so don't go anywhere. We're going to have our second panel now and hear the perspectives from the labor, environment, and business NGOs. So I invite our current panelists to step down, our new panelists to step up. Give us 1 minute to switch it around, and we'll start with the second panel. Paging Lisa Jacobson. Is Lisa Jacobson here? Lisa Jacobson or Laura Tierney? Okay, so if everyone can take your seats, we're going to get started with labor, environment, and business NGO perspectives. If everyone could please take your seats. We're going to continue to have our online audience join us, so please stay with us. If everyone could please take your seats, and if you're not staying for the second panel, if you could please move outside of the room. Thank you. So now we're going to get started with our second panel on business perspectives, business, labor, and environment perspectives on the U.S. Climate Action Plan.
What do you think? We should go? What's that? Sure. Mike, great.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. To get started on our second panel, I'm pleased to introduce John Barton, who is the Senior Advisor for the Blue-Green Alliance. He pulled together this panel for us today, and he'll be moderating as well. John.
Thank you very much. I quickly want to restate a few points for anybody new that came in the room about the Climate Action Plan. The Climate Action Plan puts into action a series of tools at the disposal of the administration. I'm going to name them quickly, and then we're going to have a conversation. These include setting carbon pollution standards for power plants, invest millions in renewables, energy efficiency, and advanced fossil fuel technologies, launches programs and pilots to enhance and support resilience preparedness, and commits to international initiatives that include combating short-lived climate pollutants. Hi, Lisa. We're now a year into the administration's plan. This panel that we have here today, who I'll introduce in a second, are representatives from labor and business and the environmental community. Each will give you an assessment of the Climate Action Plan as we're now 1 year into it. So let me first introduce Well, Mike, I'm going to introduce last because he'll be speaking in a moment. You already heard from him. But Alden Meyer, who's the Director of Strategy and Policy at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Alden's actually been at every COP since inception, I've been told, and will be giving a perspective from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Brad Markell is the Executive Director of the AFL-CIO Industrial Union Council, comes out of the United Auto Workers, and is the Chair of the Energy Task Force at the AFL-CIO. And then Lisa Jacobson is the President of the Business Council on Sustainable Energy, which represents both renewable and gas industries. And what? And energy efficiency companies. But first, we're going to kick it off with Michael Boots from the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Some of you already heard him speak earlier, but he'll visit us again right now, and then I know he's going to have to take off quickly.
Thanks a lot. I will try hard not to repeat myself for those of you who had to endure me talking an hour ago. So thanks for joining us today. This is a great panel with a set of groups who have been just really terrific partners to the Obama administration over the last 6 years, particularly as it relates to climate change. So I'm glad we could get them all together to talk a little bit about our work together on this. I wanted to spend just a few minutes to highlight some of the work under the Climate Action Plan, on all three pieces of it. So as we talked about earlier, certainly there are three big pieces of what the president laid out, both tackling carbon pollution that's driving climate change, really looking to make sure we're preparing communities for the impacts that are too late to avoid, and then leading as much as we can on the international stage to make sure that there's progress made at the global level. And we have made great progress on all three of those fronts, particularly in a tricky and challenging political context. And I'll just say one quick thing about that. The president is ready and willing, as he has been for some years now, to work with Congress to move these activities forward. But until that comes, when Congress is ready to kind of join us in this effort, we have spent the last few years really taking as many executive actions as we can to move this effort forward. And the big piece when it comes to emission reductions is what you just heard Assistant Administrator Janet McCabe talk about, and that is the Clean Power Plan at EPA, which is meant to really drive reductions of greenhouse gas emissions and carbon in the power sector. The power sector contributes about 40% of the carbon in every year in the U.S. And so after we spent a lot of time in the first term tackling transportation and really looking at fuel efficiency and doubling how far a car or a truck could go on a gallon of gas, the power sector seemed like the logical next place to go. And so this Clean Power Plan is the first time the U.S. government is tackling carbon emissions from the power plant sector. And I won't repeat all of what we just heard in the last panel, but we are making good progress there. We have a big role to play in working with states over the next 6 months to finalize that, and then over the next several years to implement it. And the folks that are on this panel have had a key role in helping us shape that, helping us think about how different constituencies across the country will embrace or implement that, and will really play a key role as we move it forward after next summer when it gets finalized. In addition to all of that effort on the emission reduction side, we have spent a lot of time thinking about how best to prepare communities from the federal level for the impacts that are too late to avoid. And so what that has largely translated into is spending a lot of time with state governments, local governments, tribal governments, to hear from them who are on the front lines of extreme weather and floods and droughts and wildfires about what it's like to interact with the federal government and how we've been a good partner in helping them respond and rebuild stronger and president. And those folks have just come back to us with more than 100 recommendations of things we could do to modernize our programs, modernize both our regulatory programs, our voluntary programs, and to think about how we align our resources, our financial resources, to incentivize what they're trying to do at the local level when it comes to resilience. The other thing that we're doing in terms of resilience is really making sure that the federal government is being as resilient as possible. We manage about 30% of the total land in the United States, and we own about 350 or own and operate about 350,000 buildings across the country, including defense facilities and NASA launch centers and a whole host of other infrastructure. And so it is incumbent on us as we ask communities and states and tribes to prepare as much as they can, that we're doing the same thing when it comes to federal facilities. And so the president has really driven that effort to make sure that we're both being responsible in terms of operations and in terms of taxpayer resources, that we're thinking about making investments that have durability way past the next storm or the next extreme weather event. The last thing I'll just highlight, and then I'll turn this back over to John. Obviously, all of those efforts, those three areas that I just described, are really the building blocks for us as we come to places like Lima and next year to Paris. The president feels very strongly that we cannot be a credible voice on the international stage unless and until we have really made a lot of progress when it comes to mitigation and adaptation and resilience at home. And so all of those efforts that I just described are really meant to strengthen our hand to make sure that we're, as we're asking you all to join us in that effort, that we are leading by example. And I just want to thank again all of the people who are on this panel who have joined us in that effort over the last few years, because we're going to need you for the next few as well. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Michael. I'd now like to turn it over to Alden Meyer from the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Thanks a lot, John. I'm just going to do it sitting down here. We'll take advantage of this casual atmosphere and kick it off. First of all, let me say I echo what Mike said. It's a very impressive plan. If you read it, I think there's 60 or 70 elements, probably more, being added every year. It's very comprehensive, very ambitious, but as always, there's more than can be done. And I'm going to talk about three areas. One is the power plant sector that we just heard from Janet on and others about the comments we just made about ways that EPA could strengthen that rule when the final rule comes out. Second, I'll talk a little bit about the heavy and medium duty truck standards for transportation, which have the potential to significantly increase both oil savings and carbon reductions from the transportation sector. And finally, I want to say a little bit about a new report that we're releasing today looking at the potential of agriculture, forestry, and the land use sector to make a bigger contribution both in the U.S. and around the world. So the first thing to say, I think we're on track. We have a shot at the 17% target for 2020, but it's going to take additional work, particularly strengthening implementation of the clean power sector and a few other areas. And I think that's even more the case for the 26 to 28% goal. Experience in the U.S. at the state level has shown that for states that are trying to achieve reductions economy-wide, they have to significantly overperform in the power sector to shoot for those goals. So my boss, Ken Kimmel, was the former Commissioner of Environmental Protection in Massachusetts and chair of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative Board of Directors. His experience was that Massachusetts, to achieve its 25% reduction target, needs to shoot for about a 50% reduction in the power sector. And I think the same thing is going to be true at the national level. So just starting with the power sector, what the EPA proposed rule adds up to is an estimated reduction of 30% in the electricity sector below 2005 levels by the year 2030. We have filed comments showing how, with some improvements in the renewable energy portion of that rule, the result of that analysis shows that we could get to a 40% reduction in 2030, not a 30%, just looking at the renewables sector. There's also work being done by NRDC and other groups on the efficiency sector that would complement that. So I think there's tremendous potential to go beyond what EPA put forward, working with the states, and we've looked at the state-by-state potential in this analysis. This is not rocket science. It's not pie in the sky. This is real-world things that can be achieved on the ground with renewable energy. So our analysis shows that we could nearly double EPA's renewable target from 12 to 23% of U.S. electricity supply by 2030, reducing emissions, as I said, by an additional 10% in the power sector, and at a very low cost to consumers, and actually putting downward pressure on natural gas prices. We also think speaking of natural gas, we think we need to limit the reliance on natural gas long term, because of course, even though natural gas has a lower carbon content than coal, it's still is a major carbon producer, and as we heard in the previous panel, there are also concerns about fugitive methane emissions from gas production. So we'd like to avoid over-incentivizing a shift from coal to gas as EPA moves forward with these rules, and we made some specific proposals how to do that. And finally, we had some pretty extensive comments in our submission to EPA on the need to address worker transition and environmental justice concerns with the rule. We urge that EPA work with states to ensure that worker transition issues are taken seriously, and that the standard for existing power plants, which may disproportionately affect certain sectors of the economy, certain workers like the coal sector, that there be some ways that states can help ameliorate these impacts. And we've been working with the White House, Jason Walsh and others, on a task force, interagency task force the White House has set up to look at how we bring to bear the full resources of the federal government to help communities and workers that will be disproportionately affected by the necessary and overall tremendously beneficial shift away from fossil-intensive energy sources. We've also called on EPA to require that states conduct an environmental justice analysis of their state compliance plans, that EPA help states with data methodology and tools to conduct these analyses, and ensure that environmental justice groups are at the table when these decisions are being made. So that's just a few of the recommendations we have in the power sector. Let me shift to the vehicle sector, where I think people are aware in the first term of the administration, tremendous progress was made on the light-duty vehicles, cars and pickup trucks. Brad was part of that in his former role at the UAW. We worked very closely with the UAW, the administration, the auto industry, the states, and others to negotiate those standards. There's a tremendous achievement. Now we have a chance to match that on the heavy-duty and medium-duty vehicle sector. And even though heavy and medium duties vehicles are responsible for only about 7% of passenger vehicles, they're responsible for about 23% of oil consumption and therefore carbon emissions in that sector. There are standards in place for 2014 to 2018 model years, and those standards are expected to reduce oil consumption by nearly 400,000 barrels a day, and to reduce carbon emissions by about 270 million metric tons. The administration is now about to propose standards going beyond 2018 out to 2025. We expect those standards to be put forward, the proposed standards to be put forward in March, and our analysis has been that those could more than double the carbon savings and the oil reductions from that sector. So there's a tremendous additional value there, and this can all be done at net savings over the lifetime of the vehicles to the purchasers and operators of these heavy-duty and medium-duty rigs. So there's a tremendous potential there, and I think we'll have a good success story to tell once that rule is finalized. Finally, on an area where we really haven't talked much today, agriculture, forestry, and land use. It's a tremendous success story, I think, if you look at countries like Brazil and the reduction of deforestation. But it turns out, according to a study that we're releasing today, the U.S. Has perhaps the greatest potential in the world to get reductions from these sectors. You may know that in the UNEP report that was put out just last month showed that we have a gap in 2020 of about 8 to 10 billion tons of CO2 emissions between what's likely to be emitted and what we need to restrict emissions to stay under the 2 degrees Celsius pathway. That grows to about 14 to 17 gigatons by 2030. We just released, we'll be releasing this report later today, showing that we can get tremendous benefits, about 7 gigatons a year by 2020 in the agriculture, forestry, and land use sector. And the good news is the largest potential in the world turns out to be in the United States. We estimate that there's 2 to 3 gigatons of carbon emission reductions. That's both on the supply side and demand side. So it's looking at things like reducing carbon from deforestation and forest degradation, decreasing emissions from agricultural sources such as methane from cattle, nitrous oxide from fertilizer and manure, and carbon from the soil. Also demand side options in terms of diet and production of things like beef. So the good news is there's more to do there, and we'll be working with the administration to looking for the kind of policies and incentives that can get the agriculture and the agriculture sector moving, and the forestry sector moving in that direction to reap some of those savings. So bottom line, there's a lot going on, but there's always more than can be done. And I think we are going to have to do more if we're going to achieve the goals that the U.S. has laid out both for 2020 and 2030.
Thank you, Alden. We're going to keep rolling here with Brad Markell from the AFL-CIO, and then hopefully at the end we'll have some time for some questions from the audience.
So the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations is the national labor center in the United States. It's comprised of about 56 unions representing over 12 million workers. And as you can imagine, we're a broad social movement. So we concern ourselves with social justice broadly defined. That includes things like women's rights, immigrant rights, what's happening in the economy, what's happening with wages, and of course, as a workers' organization, jobs and income and benefits, health care, those are the things that we're concerned about. Our members expect us to be pushing for more jobs, better jobs, and to help them improve the lives that their families and their communities enjoy. The Climate Action Plan is something that we're extremely involved with. It's all three. The initial panel really covered it a couple times. It's 3 parts, and I think it's important to remember that it's not just about mitigation, that there's a part of it that talks about making the United States more resilient and ready for climate change and international leadership. In each of those areas, we believe there's a potential for job creation. It's not always easy because, of course, some people will lose their jobs. So if you work at a coal-fired power plant over the next several years, there's a chance that you can lose your job. We're pretty convinced, and we've got some studies going, that overall a Clean Power Plan will be a net job creator, that the Climate Action Plan is for sure a net job creator, and so as a labor movement, that makes us happy. We have a lot of concerns about what kind of jobs are going to be created, but you know, around the world, that's nothing new for workers. We often struggle with the quality of jobs that are being created, whether it's from the Climate Action Plan, the normal operation of the economy, or what have you. So for us, this is through the lens of what happens to workers and communities. Cutting pollution is getting a lot of attention now, and as Alden mentioned, in my former role at the United Auto Workers, which represents workers in the auto industry, I was deeply involved, and that is just about the best thing since sliced bread, the fuel economy standards for light-duty vehicles, because we're creating a lot of jobs in the industry. In order to improve the fuel efficiency of vehicles, you have to add technology. Yes, that adds cost to the car. It doesn't cost as much as people save in their fuel reduction, but when you add technology to a car, somebody's got to engineer it and somebody's got to produce it. That, by definition, creates jobs, and we're seeing a lot of job creation in the United States for engineers and production workers around fuel-efficient vehicles and their key components. I would also say that it's improved the competitiveness of U.S.-based auto companies, because for a long time they weren't paying enough attention to fuel economy. Fuel economy standards, as Alden knows, didn't move for a long, long time. So this sort of levels the playing field, if you were, helping companies like GM and Ford catch up to what some of the international companies had been doing. Another important part of mitigation is better buildings. And for workers in the United States, retrofitting buildings or building new buildings that are highly efficient are pure job creation. Just like cars, new buildings and retrofitting buildings means that somebody's got to go in and do that work. The payoff is fantastic. I think we have some issues in the United States around finance, and especially in commercial buildings where maybe the landlords aren't that enthusiastic about the upfront cost. But those are just issues to be worked through. The basic economics of better buildings saves money and creates jobs. The Clean Power Plan is a tough one for some unions, but we've been sort of working through the details. EPA has been fantastic in its outreach and in its willingness to understand our issues. The White House has been wonderful in having somebody that really is on point to deal with worker issues. And there are a lot of sub-issues. So I said, for instance, some coal plants are going to close. Well, for us, with a focus on workers and communities, we want to know, where are those people going to be reemployed? What can we do to make sure that nobody loses their pension? I think most people know that in the U.S. we have a mainly private pension system. What happens to the tax base in those communities? Those are things that really need to be worked through as issues surrounding the Clean Power Plan, and that's been our focus for the year or so that really EPA's been talking to people about what they're up to. I will say that complementary policies are important. Jonathan on the previous panel mentioned the Advanced Vehicles Technology Manufacturers Improvement Program, investment program. That really started to form an industrial policy in the United States, sort of a 1-2 punch. You create fuel-efficient standards, you create standards that are good for the environment, then we use a complementary policy to make sure that companies can invest the money cheaply that they need to and create jobs in the United States. So that 1-2 of environmental policy and investment policy has really been good for the United States. He mentioned Tesla. I'll mention that the Ford Motor Company, which is a UAW represented firm, received a loan of almost $6 billion. They invested that, and they brought a lot of work back from overseas. They're making hybrid parts. They're making electric vehicles, all along the way creating jobs. Loans and grants to bridge market troughs and to sort of get from the conceptual phase into the deployment phase are extremely important. I think everybody who's paid attention to tech knows that there's this valley of death, and it's extremely important that as we are trying to pull environmentally friendly technologies, we recognize that there's maybe a little bit of a glitch in the way that businesses are funded, and the government should step in to make sure that those new technologies get to market as quickly as possible. I'll also say that for businesses to invest, it's really important that we have consistent, knowable policies. People hate putting money out there and then wondering, whether the policy is going to be there or whether that driver for that business is going to be there. The quintessential issue in the United States is the production tax credit for windmills. It's been very important driving up our renewable energy volume, but it's subject to the whims of Congress, and the United States Congress really does sort of go back and forth on this, and we need consistent policies. In the auto industry, we know we've got a plan until 2025 that's going to drive investment. It's given companies the confidence that they can do all the very expensive upfront engineering and that they can make product plans for 5 years or 8 years from now, when they really know that they're still going to be improving fuel economy little bit by little bit, and that investment's not going to go to waste. In fact, it's going to attract customers to them. Alden mentioned just transition. I will say that, that's the union's issue around these climate talks, around what happens to workers in the United States. What will happen to people who work in coal plants and have pensions? What around the world, it means different things to different people. It's not getting the attention it needs in these talks. I think a number of governments are receptive to that, and we're very happy with some of the discussion that we've been having with the U.S. government. But just transition as a concept is something that needs to be pushed forward, because after all, fighting climate change is about people and what happens to people, what happens to communities and nations. And we in the labor movement have a very strong feeling that people need to be involved to define that for themselves. I can't look at somebody else or some other country and say, what is it going to take for you to make out well as this thing goes. People need to speak for themselves, and a process that allows communities, indigenous communities, women, labor, environmental groups to say, how can this work is extremely important. We've sort of grouped all that together in the concept of just transition, and it's something that we're very keen on. And then finally, I just want to say that the Blue-Green Alliance and the AFL-CIO, along with some groups in New York City, Align is a Jobs with Justice chapter, and a coalition of environmental justice groups, are releasing a report next week that lays out a plan for New York City that we think sort of shows the way forward. How can we have environmental justice, create jobs, mitigate carbon emissions, and make New York City more resilient. And here I'm going to just sort of tick off the list of things that are in this report that we're going to be working with the New York City government on: to large building retrofits, combined heat and power, solar on schools, fixed leaking gas distributions. Many people know that there was a horrible explosion, a natural gas explosion up in Harlem earlier this year. Microgrids, which really both improve efficiency and help with resilience. Flood protection and stormwater runoff systems. More public transport, and especially bus rapid transit, which is sort of a really good bang for the buck. It doesn't exist enough. Resilient hospitals. Hospitals got shut down during Superstorm Sandy, and we really want that to stop. And more efficient waste hauling and recycling. Put all those together, and what you've got is this kind of suite of policies that create jobs, mitigate climate emissions, and push environmental justice forward. And we think there are a lot more opportunities out there like that. We'd love to take this to every large city in the nation, and that's how we think we can achieve a just transition.
Thank you, Brad. Finally, for a business perspective, again, Lisa Jacobson is president of the Business Council on Sustainable Energy. So take it away, Lisa.
Great, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. And let me just tell you a little bit about the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. We are a U.S.-based trade association, and we represent companies and associations in the energy efficiency, renewable energy, and natural gas industries. And we've been a part of this process since 1992. That was the year that this organization was founded. And one of the first things that the board did was participate in the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And they went there with a lot of the same approaches that they bring to here, the Lima conference. They want to offer technology solutions that we know are readily available to reduce emissions and to make our economies more resilient. They want to constructively engage to ensure that the policy direction of this process, as well as what national governments do and subnational entities like cities do, are practical, cost-effective, and beef up and modernize our energy infrastructure. It's critical. Very quickly, this is a conversation, about the Climate Action Plan, but I just want to share with you what our industries seek here very briefly. We are looking for two main deliverables in Lima. We would like to see, obviously, progress on the broader ADP text that will give us a signal and a framework for the Paris Agreement. And then secondly, we would like to see progress on the information that countries will need to utilize when they bring forward their contributions, hopefully early next year, both on mitigation and adaptation and whatever other areas they seek to provide those contributions. This is very important for the business community because it sets the stage for the level of ambition, and it goes back to the comments that were just made on policy direction and policy certainty. We want to know, not only for the United States, but in all markets that we operate in, what the path forward and the rules of the road are going to be. And then we can step in and offer the technology solutions to achieve them. So having an understanding and being able to easily compare from one country to a next the types of contributions and the ways in which countries are going to be implementing those contributions is extremely valuable, not only to parties and other stakeholders, but to the business community as well. So we'd like to see progress on both of those fronts here. We are talking about the United States, so I thought it would be helpful to just share a few facts with you about recent trends in the United States. We have been undergoing a very rapid and unimaginable transformation in the energy sector in just the last 5 to 7 years. The Business Council for Sustainable Energy, in partnership with Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which is an energy analytic firm in the United States, put together a few years ago the Sustainable Energy in America Fact Book. We did this because we were interested, this was our 20-year anniversary, and we were interested in better understanding the recent trends in our own industries. And we also know that combined heat and power, different renewable energy technologies, and a number of other sectors that we represent are not easily, the information on these market trends and the economics of these industries is not widely available. So we were trying to fill data gaps. Well, we put this data together and we saw something that took us all by surprise. we found that efficiency, renewables, and natural gas were on a steep rise. And again, a faster rise that many had predicted even a few short years ago. And that we found the conventional sources were declining in the United States. And again, at a bigger and faster rate than we would have expected. That's due to policy, it's due to new technologies, and it's due to investments and the economics and the cost reductions in many of these sectors. So it was a pretty dramatic change. So after we released our first report in 1992, we continued it, and I just wanted to share with you just a few of the stats from our most recent report, which came out based on 2013 data. In 2013, natural gas and renewable energy provided over 40% of U.S. electricity generation in 2013. That was up 10% since 2007. U.S. energy use had fallen by 5% from 2007 to 2013, while GDP has grown by 6%. And this is this decoupling that we had seen in that time period between energy use, emissions, and GDP, which shows us that we can grow the economy and we can reduce emissions. And those trends were because, in large measure, to energy efficiency in the transportation sector, as well as the power generation sector. But we will find that the more we do, the easier it will become, the less expensive it will be, and we will only do more. So that's our outlook. Related to that, we had a big announcement for the United States and China, which I'm sure was covered in the panel before. But it shows us the forward-looking direction and the leadership at the national level towards emissions reductions. And when we looked at the data through 2013, we also found something surprising. The U.S. was over halfway to reaching its 17% reduction goal that it announced in Copenhagen, and we did not expect to see that. So we can do this, and it requires a leadership by the business community as well as governments and other actors. So let me switch to the Clean Power Plan, which I'm going to focus on. The organization, its broad-based membership, many different business models, many different sectors, you came together a year ago and released preliminary comments to EPA about what it wanted to see out of the Clean Power Plan. Some of these elements included state flexibility, the opportunity to use the broad set of commercially available technologies for compliance purpose. That included things on regulated entities as well as outside the regulated sector to provide opportunities for energy efficiency, for broader use of distributed generation, for transportation technologies. I mean, the transportation side, actually, I should pull that one back. We aren't expecting that the transportation sector would have a role in our system-wide approach, but it has the transportation opportunities in the electricity sector. You know, it's hard to separate them, even though they don't fall under the Clean Power Plan. So let me clarify that. I wouldn't want to confuse anybody. But we sought the opportunity through this program for states to develop compliance plans that fully utilized all the assets that they had at their disposal. So that was extremely important. And when we looked at what the EPA had put forward in June of this year, we were very pleased to see that a lot of these top-line elements were included. And so, number one, we think that this is a workable initiative. We think that the state flexibility in particular is a key to offering the opportunity to do this in a cost-effective way that ensures reliability of our electricity system. And we also very much appreciated this viewpoint that we can look at achieving compliance by utilizing the broad set of technologies that will impact the power generating sector. Again, that's energy efficiency, it's renewable energy, it's other opportunities to use better industrial processes like combined heat and power. And we look forward now to really putting the fine points on the Clean Power Plan to make those principles that were incorporated in them more clear for states in particular, and also the business community that will be working in partnership with states to implement the plans. A couple other areas that we've been focused on, and we also submitted comments just a week or so ago to the EPA. We were interested in a couple other pieces that they included. One, they put a very appropriate and positive nod to consideration of regional compliance planning. Clearly, this Clean Power Plan is driven by state action. But when states wish to come together and consider their regional power grid and other needs and inputs that they may have, we think they should be able to work together, adopt compacts, or coordinate in whatever fashion they'd like to reduce emissions. Why is that important? Well, it mirrors the way that power generation is distributed in many parts of the country, but it also enables for more cost-effective compliance opportunities, and that's critical. We also appreciated the inclusion of opportunities to consider state programs that were mass-based or rate-based. And by doing something like that, they open up the opportunity for more market-based programs, again, driven by the state itself, not driven by the federal government. This is driven by state interest. So I think I'll stop there and see if we can have some discussion. But I mean, overall, the Climate Action Plan, as Alden said, I mean, it is a very comprehensive plan. It doesn't just deal with mitigation. It deals with other important areas. And it really kind of articulated many of the initiatives that recent administrations have adopted, but put it in a clear framework, and the business community appreciated that, and it gives us a better sense of where to focus looking forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. So we have a few minutes now for some questions. We might just take a few if you have them, and then we'll answer them in a group. So why don't we start over here?
Michael Green, American Sustainable Business Council. Thank you so much for your questions. One of the issues that we're dealing with, we have members in Massachusetts, where I'm based, as well as folks in North Carolina and Tennessee. The amount of resources that are available for businesses to understand how to take action around the Climate Action Plan in Massachusetts in comparison to North Carolina is vastly different. So how can we work as entities outside of the federal government to educate, work, share best practices, whether it's through labor and workforce shared practices or through businesses? Thank you.
Other questions? Should we get other? Let's take a whole round. Other questions?
Yes, over there.
Hello, Ken Yamaguchi from Mitsubishi Research, Japan. I've always thought that labor unions tend to have a very cautious standpoint against climate policy, so I was a bit surprised about your very forthcoming opinion about the Clean Power Plan. You mentioned some analysis being done on the employment impacts of Clean Power Plan. Where can I get the materials? Thanks.
And just one more? We have just one more question?
Anyone else? All right, we'll go with those two.
So everybody in the world has a job impact analysis of the Clean Power Plan, including the EPA. So if you dig into their material and their regulatory impact analysis, there's a somewhat incomplete analysis. They only had the ability and the space to go so far. Our true deep dive on this is not ready yet. For those familiar with the United States, there's an outfit called the Economic Policy Institute. They are in the middle of very deep modeling of the Clean Power Plan. And when that's released, probably sometime early summer, there'll be a pretty big splash about it. But what we know for sure is that a number of people are going to lose their jobs. And from the union point of view, those are very well-paying, highly unionized jobs. And a lot of jobs will be created, almost certainly, more jobs than are lost. But our questions are around where are those jobs? How, is there a spatial mismatch between the jobs created and the jobs lost? And what will be the quality of those jobs? But, if you Google Clean Power Plan employment impacts, you'll get probably a couple thousand hits. I will say that the Political Economy Research Institute out of UMass Amherst put out a study in September that really didn't address the Clean Power Plan per se, but it did talk a lot about what the employment impacts of fighting climate change would be, and they're quite large on the positive side.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of modeling, as Brad said. Let me give you some real-world job impacts that we know about from comments that states just filed to the EPA. In California, the renewable portfolio standard there, which we've been fighting for over more than a decade, which will require California to get 33% of its electricity from renewables by 2020, is projected to generate $60 billion of investment in the California economy and create 235,000 jobs just in that one state. That's California's projections. By 2015, Illinois' renewable portfolio standard is projected to bring $6 billion in new investment, create over 5,000 jobs, while its energy efficiency portfolio standard is projected to save the average household close to $100 a year, stimulate $5 billion in economic activities, and create over 16,000 new jobs in Illinois. And finally, in Massachusetts, surveys by the Clean Energy Centers show an 11.8% increase in clean energy jobs in 2013 alone, just in 1 year. And the clean energy employment has grown between 6 and 12% annually over the last 5 years. There are now nearly 80,000 employees working in clean energy in Massachusetts. So there's just 3 states, but dramatic growth and impacts on clean energy investment, clean energy employment. Those are not modeling projections, those are real-world statistics.
Thanks. So I'll take a stab at trying to answer your question, and it's great to see your organization represented here. I think organizations like yours that are reaching out to medium and small businesses are critical. My membership tends to be larger companies, and we are primarily power sector focused in the United States. But my immediate reaction, since I have the Clean Power Plan on my mind, is that the Clean Power Plan, by shifting the thought leadership and the compliance planning to the state level, which in turn then shifts it to major cities and in major populations in those states, actually is maybe one way to bridge that gap between companies that aren't regulated but may want information, may want to engage somehow in the climate process. So most states are going to be have already started to do, or will be starting very soon, pretty extensive stakeholder and outreach processes in the state, because dealing with emissions reduction involves all aspects of their economy. So they need to be on the road asking questions and getting input. There are also a number of industry organizations, whether it be the local chambers or other industry groups that are organizing now at the state and local level, and I'm happy to give you more, or anybody else more resources. But I think because the Clean Power Plan is focused on local implementation and flexibility, it's going to engage a larger swath of the business community.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm sorry we have to close, but hopefully if you have any final questions, the panelists can stick around for a few minutes. Thanks again for joining us. Let's give a final round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. And just to let you know, we have 2 more events today. At 4 p.m., Lisa will stay here with us and talk about a climate twofer, integrating sustainable energy resilience. So we'll hear more about the mitigation adaptation nexus. And at 6 p.m., Mike Boots will be back for Enhancing Resilience, U.S. Actions on Resilience. Okay, so lots more to come. I hope to see you.